Hello and welcome to Board Game Gumbo. Today we're taking a look at a game that's going to be launching in early March on Kickstarter. This is Canosa by One Day West Games. Canosa is a two-player abstract strategy game where each player will be taking control of one of the sirens, either the silver siren or the gold siren. And you're attempting to get the sailors to your island. And when you do that, you'll score them. The first player to score 4 sailors wins. So let's take a look at how to play the game, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Kickstarter later in the video. As with most two-player abstract strategy games, Canosa is really an easy game to learn. The board is going to be set up as the way you see it here. Each player is going to control one of the sirens, and the sirens have a couple of wooden rings on them, starting with 2. You then see a total of 10 sailors on the board. Half of them have a gold ring, the other half have a silver ring on them. As a siren player, you control the sailors that have your corresponding color ring on them. So the silver siren here is in control of all of the sailors with a silver ring on them and can move those sailors. On your turn, you're going to take 2 actions. You can take the same action twice if you want to. The first action you can take is to move your siren. Your siren can move 1 space in any direction it chooses, including diagonally. So it could move here as its first action. There's a couple restrictions to where sirens can move. Once a siren leaves their island, which is denoted on the board, they can never return to it. Sirens cannot share the same space with a sailor. They also can't jump over sailors, but they can move around them. Finally, sirens can move into a space with an opposing siren, but only if they have more rings on them. So this siren has 2 rings. In an example, if this gold siren only had 1 and I was over here, I could choose to move into the gold siren space, at which point the player controlling the gold siren would have to choose a location now adjacent to the silver siren to move their siren. So you can sort of force the opponent's siren out of a specific space, but they are in control of their movement if you do so. So that's the first action, that's movement. The second thing you can do is you can move a ring from your siren to a sailor that is adjacent to you. Again, diagonally counts for this. And when you do this, you simply remove the top ring from your siren and put it onto any sailor that you're adjacent to. You can even put one of your rings onto a sailor that you already control if you choose to. These rings are really important because they determine who controls the movement of those particular sailors. By placing my ring onto this sailor, I now have control of it. It's under my song's power. So later in the game, I can move that sailor if I chose to. The third action you can do is to remove a ring from a sailor. This works in basically the same way, except that you can only ever remove the top ring from a sailor. So if the gold siren was over here, it could not remove its ring from the sailor because it's at the bottom position. But the silver siren, if it wanted to, could remove that ring. And now that sailor is back under the control of the gold siren. If a sailor would ever have no rings on it, it's considered neutral and no siren has control of it. One thing to keep in mind, which is actually really important in the game, is that any figure can only ever have 3 rings at a time. That includes sirens and sailors. So for instance, during the course of the game, if I put a ring here and then the gold siren were to somehow put a ring on it as well, I cannot take an action to put another ring on this sailor. It's maxed out. The same can be said for sirens. They can only ever have 3 rings at a time. And that's important because whenever a sailor is captured and goes off the board, those rings are returned. And if you ever would have more than 3, you actually don't get them. So that's the first 3 actions in the game. The last action is moving a sailor under your control. So we have the silver siren here. It controls all 5 of these sailors with its rings on it, and it can choose to move them. Sailors have to move towards their target island. So I couldn't, for instance, move this sailor here. It's moving away from the island that it wants to go to. The song only pulls it towards the island. They can't try to escape. But I could move it closer to the island, such as moving it there. Sailors cannot move diagonally. They can only move in cardinal directions, so up, down, left, or right. Just like sirens, they can't jump over other pieces, and they can't move into locations where there's another sailor or where there's a siren. The last thing is if a sailor is ever captured, and that is when it moves onto an island that matches the ring it's on, it gets removed from the board and scored immediately. You need to do this 4 times in order to win. And whenever you do this, the player is just going to get removed and put off to the side. And any rings on the sailor are going to be returned with a few limitations. We already mentioned one of them, being that the siren can only have 3 rings on it at a time. So if it had 3 and were to gain another one, the extra ring will just get removed from the game and put back into the game box. The other exception is whenever you score a sailor, you only return 1 ring of each color. So if this sailor, when it was captured, instead looked like this, it would still get removed from the game board, and these rings would get returned. 1 ring for the silver player, and 1 ring for the gold player. But the second silver ring would get returned to the box. It would get removed from the game. So whenever you capture a sailor, you only return 1 ring of each color. Any extras are just removed to the box. So now let's take a little time to talk about the Kickstarter coming in March. And for that, I have switched to the deluxe version of Canosa. One Day West did a Kickstarter specifically for this version earlier this year. It was part of Kickstarter's Make 100 program, so they only made 100 of these sets of the game. And you'll notice that the player pieces themselves are identical to what comes in the retail version, and that's intentional. One Day West wants to keep the wooden pieces for the retail edition, even though the box itself is going to be cardboard and not this wooden box. Aside from the pieces, the game board itself here actually slides out and flips over to become the top of the box. And then the inside of the box is all wooden as well, with a nice little organizer in it. So this is the deluxe version of the game. It has a pretty hefty price tag. This is $125, or at least it was when they did their last Kickstarter. If you are interested in this version of the game, One Day West does plan to include it in the new Kickstarter. Whether it will be a pledge tier or something you can add in the add-ons pledge later, they haven't quite decided. But if you're looking for this, definitely keep your eyes on the Kickstarter when it launches in March. So now back to the retail edition, which is significantly cheaper than that deluxe edition we just looked at. This is going to be $39 when the Kickstarter launches. For that, you'll get all of these pieces still in wood, as well as the game board here in the box. The way this is set up, that I have it, the game board on top of the box here, is actually their intention for the game. One is to kind of show the artwork to get you more into the theme of sirens and sailors after a shipwreck. Instead of the foam that you can see here, it'll actually have a game tray insert that the board will sit on top of. And I think that's a really nice inclusion. One, it helps eliminate space. A lot of times when you're setting up a board game, you have to not only find a spot to put the game, but you have to find a spot to put the box and everything. So to include this mechanism where the board is going to sit in the box itself kind of helps you limit space. I do really love the wooden pieces. I hope they stay this same sort of size and texture, because they're really impressive. I feel that they might change slightly, but One Day West is committed to doing these pieces still in wood. So I think that's a really nice choice on their part. That's all we have for you today for Canosa from One Day West Games. Kickstarter is launching in early March. You'll be able to find a link to the preview page in the description of this video. So if it's something that interests you, go ahead and go to that preview page and click Notify Me on Launch, so you'll get an email when the game goes live. Thank you again for watching our videos, and we hope you've enjoyed it.